All right, welcome to the Fame of Fantasy. This channel is all about giving you inspiration to master your craft and create fantasy that will truly immerse your audience. So today, it's on my end at least, it's pretty late evening, and we've sort of been struggling, Joseph and I, with technical issues with Google Hangout and whatnot for at least 30 minutes. So we've had some fun already, but we're going to talk about pitfalls when world building. We're going to talk about some realism in fantasy and some practical world building. So I'm joined by Joseph today. So thanks so much for being on Fame of Fantasy, Joseph. And maybe you want to introduce yourself a bit.
Yeah, thanks, Jesper. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here. My name is Joseph Malik. I'm a fantasy author, and boy, I don't even know how to say that. I write books. I have a fantasy series now. I just released the second book last month. It's been out for a month now, and the first book is called Dragon's Trail, and the second book is called The New Magic. Dragon's Trail did extraordinarily well, especially considering that it was a release on my own imprint. I started my own publishing company about 2 years ago, and did it myself. And it's gone on to it's been a Kindle bestseller now in 4 countries, and just sold its 10,000th copy this summer. It's doing very well. And I want to talk a little bit about, because this comes up again and again in my conversations with my readers, and when I do conventions and lectures and that kind of thing. I'm speaking at some colleges and schools as well. I want to talk a little bit about realism and fantasy, and about the importance of realism in your fantasy world building, how much you can get away with, how much is too much, and all of that sort of thing. I guess the big thing about it is that I did most of my fantasy research in person. Over the course of about 10 years, I learned swordsmanship. I learned how to ride a horse. I learned how to make steel out of iron and charcoal in a backyard forge. I built a language for one of the races in my book. I went to Europe and paced off castles and ruins, and basically did as much of it as I could in person, so that I could get the fundamental details, the mundane details correct.
That's certainly not something we hear or see very often. So that alone is pretty unique, I think.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I didn't know any different. I started doing this back, before the advent of the internet. This was back in the 90s when I was doing this stuff. And back then, I just figured that this was what all fantasy writers did. I thought that, rappelling off cliffs and sword fighting was just part of the fantasy gig. I figured you get your English degree, and then you start writing, and then you start doing your research. And so I honestly thought that's what it was. And it wasn't really until, I don't know, maybe about a year ago, when I started doing conventions and people started realizing, I've been doing conventions for a few years, but not as an author, because the book only came out 2 years ago. And starting to talk to other fantasy authors about this, and getting these, strident responses from other fantasy authors about my method. And I was literally, at first, I was like, "Well, you don't sword fight? What do you mean you've never ridden a horse? Like, how the hell can you, I mean, and you can research things, you can do things, you can go on Google, you can go on YouTube, you can see how things work, but readers will believe in flying horses if the saddle makes sense." So getting that level of detail on the mundane aspects of things has really helped raise the suspension of disbelief, and really bring the believability and the authenticity, I think, of the world building to a new level. And that's what I set out to do, and it's what a lot of reviewers and readers are saying, is that nobody's really ever built a book like this. And I really wanted to. What really did it for me was back in the late 80s, when I was first starting writing, back even in like high school. I was reading fantasy, and there were all of these just insane technical errors that I would find in these fantasy books, and things that even I knew better than as a kid. And the more I started the more I started reading that stuff, the more errors I started finding. And about the same time, The Hunt for Red October came out, probably a couple of years later, and it changed my life. And I wondered why nobody had ever written a fantasy novel with that level of detail and that level of accuracy. And I decided that's what I wanted to do. That was going to be my life's work, was to write a fantasy series one day that did for Knights in Armor what The Hunt for Red October did for the nuclear submarine. That's what I wanted to do. So I, started doing it. But there's also a way to overdo it as well. But the reason that it's important, I guess, getting back to what I was originally saying, and I'm kind of talking in circles, and I apologize for that, but is that in order to suspend disbelief enough that readers will buy into the magical aspects of your world, you first have to suspend disbelief in the mundane. And I really think that mundane errors in fantasy world building throw the reader out of the book for just a moment when they say, oh, wait, no, that's not how that works. That's not what that does. And what I've found is that by going to conventions where I don't so much speak about world building as I do demonstrate sword fighting and martial arts and celestial navigation, and teach, do these sort of classes and lectures more than anything else, the more I find this huge pool of readers who are just as frustrated as I was with fantasy authors who get the little things wrong, the things that these fantasy readers know. And fantasy readers know a lot. I mean, there are a lot of readers out there who do this stuff as a hobby. Lots of fantasy readers own swords. Lots of fantasy readers do. They might do LARP. They might be in the SCA, and do armored combat. They may take up martial arts. They may know, they may know things. They may have been to castles and know, hey, wait, that's not right. That's not how that works. And there are a lot more of them than I ever thought there were. I really thought I was going to be writing for a small niche market, and the first book exploded as soon as I started doing conventions and demonstrating that I was an author who could actually do this stuff. So,
I certainly, I agree that people pick up things that you didn't even think about yourself. If you put something into a book that you didn't even consider it, you can bet somebody will pick it up and point it out. And that's not even only fantasy. I also heard some I think it was a thriller author talking about how he had a gun in the book, and he was explaining, I think it was something to do with the clip or the magazine, and so he used one word or the other. And then somebody was complaining in the reviews about that's not a clip, it's a magazine, or vice versa. I can't remember if it was one or the other, but
that's all it takes.
Things gets picked up.
You bet. I read a lot of thrillers. I read a lot of action thrillers, and I worked with my editor on these books to make these books read in the style of an action thriller instead of in a fantasy voice.
Yeah.
And I wanted thriller pacing, and I wanted these to be kind of fantasy spy novels. But I read a lot of thrillers to get to drill down on that stuff. And I found one in a thriller that was put out by a trade publisher. And I'm not going to mention names here because I don't make anybody mad, but I think it's fairly well known. And in it, the one of the bad guys, I think, used a revolver that had a silencer on it. And you're in Europe, so I don't know as much about guns as we do here in America, but the sound from a revolver, the sound that a suppressor suppresses comes out of the barrel of the gun, but a revolver, a lot of it comes out from around what's it called? Anyway, the part where the bullets sit has holes in it, and that's where the sound comes from. And suppressors don't work on revolvers. And that was in a book that sold, God, that's a book you can find in the airport. This stuff is out there, and
but that's also in one way it depends on how we look at it. But in one way, you could also say that's comforting in the way that even if you out there watching do make an error, don't worry, it happens to the best. So
no, it definitely is. And I ran into a mindset too when I've been talking to other authors, and there are plenty of authors out there who understand that you're going to get things wrong, and that the majority of readers don't care. And if you do get these things wrong, that you're going to, that you run the risk of alienating what they considered to be a small subset of readers, but we went forward with the marketing for these books and the way that they're built, with the assumption that that readership is actually a lot larger than people, people give it credit. So yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll see. But the flip side of that is that you can put too much realism into your world building. And I was at a yeah. So yeah,
maybe
go ahead.
To try to, let's say, pull it a bit in the direction of the world building itself.
Yes.
So because I was wondering, so when you sit and you do your world building, how much do you think about, I'm just making some random stuff up here, but
sure.
For example, the saddle on the flying horse or the dragon, as you mentioned earlier on, for example, how much do you think about that? Or is that more something that you sort of just, when you get to that part in the writing, then you write it? Or what's your recommendation? I mean, of course, you say you have been sword fighting and all these things, which most of us haven't. So do you recommend that people sort of research this stuff before they get into actually developing it, as part of their world building? Or do you think you should just, you figure out it as you go? What's your view on it?
Well, I'm going to try and find something on another computer and see if I can share that to the screen while I talk to you. So excuse me for just a minute while I look off screen. I think it's perfectly okay to do this, as you go, but let's see if I can find this. However, what you can, oh, come on. Someplace I got a picture of the actual saddles for the flying horses and how we actually drew them out. And give me 1 second.
You drew them and everything.
To find it. Oh yeah, we had to actually draw them out. And you can do this as you go. You really can. And when you come to a world building issue, and then it's as simple as, picking up the phone and calling somebody who might know something about it and going out and just having a beer and a plate of wings with them or something, and just going and talking to them. Hey, here's how this, here's how we did this. And here's what I need to do, and here's what I need you to do, and I'm never going to find this thing. I'll give it to you when this is over. I'll send it to you.
No worries.
But you can tell them, hey, this is what I need to do, and is this going to work, and is this not going to work, and how does this function? How does that function? One of the things that we did with the saddles was we had to figure out how somebody would actually sit on a flying horse, which was really tricky because where the wings come out of a Pegasus, they're right on your legs. And when the wings flap, they're going to come up high enough that you can't actually swing a sword. Along the same line, you would have to be belted into the saddle so you can't joust with a lance, because if you hit somebody with a lance and they're stuck to something as heavy as a horse, then you're just going to skewer them right through, and then you've got a whole other world of problems. You can't shoot a bow off of a Pegasus because they dive at about the speed that an arrow flies. So we ran into all of these issues, and the big thing was how they were going to sit on the horses. And we ended up building a kind of saddle that, sketching out a kind of saddle where the rider kneels on top of the wings, like on top of the back of the horse, with their toes back on the hips and their knees on the flanks, and then the lower leg gets belted onto the saddle. But in order to do that, then I had to create an entire different type of knight to do that. Instead of the big, barrel-chested, knight, the knights who ride the Pegasi, a lot of them are female. A lot of them, if they're men, they're very lithe, they have dancers' builds because they have to sit in this kind of modified yoga position the entire time. It takes tremendous flexibility and lower body strength to do it. And then the way the saddles actually worked, the amount of belts and things that have to be on a saddle like that to make it actually function led me to like a mention in the second book about the salves that they have to rub into the horses, because if you have a saddle that's rubbing at a certain point, over time you get abscesses. So that led to this whole other thing about the Pegasi being these amazing, powerful creatures, but being prone to abscesses and infections and all of these things. So they're really, and this whole an entire castle that's devoted just to taking care of them with these wizards who were effectively veterinarians taking care of these horses. And being in the military too, I see this a lot with our equipment. It seems like the more powerful the equipment is that we have, the more prone it is to failure and the more finicky it gets. And so I was able to play some of that stuff into it as well. But I ended up building this entire section of their military and this whole kind of research and development aspect of this fantasy military into just the horses, you know. So that's one way to look at how one example, I guess, of how your world building kind of feeds on itself. You know, we started with the straps and ended up with this whole research and development facility that's housed in a castle.
Yeah,
so,
and you just took the words right out of my mouth there, because I was just about to say that it's always funny with world building that you start in one corner and all of a sudden you have all these different aspects that is now developed, and all of a sudden you have a castle with wizards who are supposed to heal, and you know, all that stuff just comes out of a very small thing. And that's on one hand, that's the wonderful thing, I think, with world building that makes it so funny is or interesting, all the things that comes out of it. But at the same time, it's also the world building curse, because you can get sucked into this and just keep going forever with all these details.
That's the other piece of it, is you can get way too far into it. And I owe a huge debt of gratitude to my editor, who I think is wildly underpaid, because her job was to take this stuff out and make it readable while still making it make sense. And that was just, man, that it was a Leviathan task, and she did a phenomenal job with it. So you can put too much, you can go too far into your world building by overdoing the details, and guilty. But also something that I did not ever expect or intend is that I have developed a small cult following. And at first I thought I was being trolled, but apparently I'm not. These guys who send me, and one woman who send me emails and messages and things. And okay, I'm going to back up a little bit. So I'm in the U.S. military. I'm in the Army Reserve, and I was in special operations for a while when I was younger. And I've got this, following who suspects, I guess, that I was part of some kind of black ops program that actually explores other dimensions, and that's the only way that I could possibly know how to, you know, ride a horse and sword fight and speak Elvish and know my way around a castle and use celestial navigation on an alien planet and all of these things. Don't
say that that's not the case. It's much cooler just to leave it at that. That maybe I actually did that.
I will neither confirm nor deny.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's been really cool, and that to me was when I realized that I'd really nailed it with my world building. And I love that aspect of fantasy readership, the people who want to believe that hard, and the people who do believe, and the people who take it upon themselves to really dig into something that deeply. I mean, I get these readers, and they're fabulous. I mean, who go in and take my stuff apart line by line. Well, here you said, and here you said, and here you said, and when you put these together, then that I'm seeing this, and I'm just like, wow, I didn't even think to put that in.
Yeah, that happens a lot. Yeah.
But you get the realism obsessed reader as well, and so you can actually you end up with unintended consequences. But again, I'm pretty happy with the way it's gone.
Yeah.
So
what are some practical tips when it then comes to, you know, so if some of the people watching this video is thinking, okay, this realism things, that sounds quite cool. I would like to see if I can, well, at least elevate my world building just a little with more realism. What are some practical tips that they can employ to do that, apart from going out and start learning sword fighting and fly to Europe to watch castles and stuff? What else can they do that it maybe is a bit more down to earth for most people?
Sure. I mean, I don't think you can do too much research. I just don't think you can. I think that research is writing. I mean, what if I can pick this? I don't want to move my computer because this headset's being so wonky. But if I could turn my laptop, I would show you that I have a research bookcase right over here that is completely full of, I mean, history texts, military texts, ancient texts of translations of old manuals at arms. And that was just for the last book. And I've got, I mean, every wall of my upstairs great room has got a bookshelf on it. And I swap these books out from as I'm writing from book to book. I don't think you can do too much. I really don't. And if you can't get out and do it for yourself, then, as I said earlier, there's so much that you can do by just having a beer with somebody who's done it. You know, I mean, you can get so much accomplished. One of the things that we did when we were building the saddles is, you know, we went to this place just right down the street here that trains horses, and talked to them about, you know, jumping horses. What happens when you jump a horse? Can we get some pictures of you jumping a horse? And you realize that, like, when you jump a horse, that your legs actually go up in the air behind it on the stirrups, which means that if you're getting back to the Pegasus, if you're on a Pegasus and you're doing a dive, then your legs are actually going up behind the horse and you have absolutely no control over it on its way down. And so, I mean, it's all these things, but you wouldn't think of that unless you go and actually talk to somebody who did it. There's a lot to be done with that kind of thing. And the other part of it, and the thing that I think really sells it, is that by having done these things on my own, I have stories behind the world building. I can talk, I don't just describe how things work, but I describe how they got there. And there are all these little, like, vignettes, and some of these things are things that happened to me when I was doing this stuff. And some of these things are stories that people have told me when I was learning how to do these things and taking lessons. And, you know, I spent a weekend, like I was saying, in a forge. You know, I got all these really hilarious stories about, you know, about this guy working in the forge, about the time when this thing broke and that thing exploded, and the time that this caught on fire, and yada, yada, yada. And you can get that from talking to people. You can get that from going out and just, you know, just making friends and you know, finding them online or doing, you know, video conferences or whatever. I'm really big on the whole face-to-face thing, though. And especially for the things that I'm not able to do in person, I have no problem finding somebody who's done it and going and talking to them. So that's,
yeah, you might be a bit different than most of us in that regard. You know, most of us authors, we like to just stay in our own little room here and don't go out and talk to people. Most of us.
I know, and it's hard. And I'm an introvert as well. I am.
You are? Okay.
I just, you know, I can pretend to be an extrovert to get my job done. And that's really what it comes down to. It's like I put on like an extrovert costume.
Yeah.
And then go out to do it. But
you can put your author costume on at least. But because actually, I think most people, even people you don't know at all, if you are, I mean, some of the viewers here are not necessarily authors. Some of them are just world building for their sort of own fantasy world. So, but those who are authors, at least, or you can just pretend to be one for one day. Nobody
absolutely.
But but if you go out to somebody you don't know and say that I'm writing a book and I'm wondering how can you help me in showing how you're jumping on a horse or whatever, most people will love it when they sort of understand the context of why you're asking.
Absolutely, you bet. And then you give them a shout out in the back of the book. If you look in the back of Dragon's Trail, in the back of the New Magic, I've got a whole list of acknowledgments in there. Hey, thank you for this. Thank you for this. Thank you for this. Thank you for this. You know, the swords that I use in the books, a lot of them are based off of actual swords that are built by people I know. And so I've had so many questions and so many inquiries into where people can buy a sword, like my main character, Jared. Where can I buy Jared's rapier? Where can I buy, you know, Carter's great sword? Where can I buy this? You know, does anybody actually make that? And I'm like, well, actually, yeah. And so at the end of the New Magic, I actually talk about the different kinds of swords and who makes them and what they're based off of and where you can find that kind of thing. And you try to give that stuff back as well. You know, it's all part of it. But yeah, and you're right. People are wonderful when you tell them you're writing a book and you need some help. I've never had anybody say no, not once. Yeah, and hell, I got Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes they'll let you do amazing things too. I mean, there's a bit of a spoiler, but there's a scene in Dragon's Trail where the main character has to get somebody out of a tower, and he's a stuntman. And I attended stunt school when I was younger, and I used to do high falls, and he uses a base jumping rig, like a parachute that you use to jump off of things at low heights. And I had an opportunity several years ago, God, 15, 20 years ago, to go base jumping, which was really fun, and do an actual tandem base jump with somebody. So I got to see how the whole thing worked. I got to see how you get take the pilot chute and you shake the extra line out of it and throw it up and then jump off the thing, and what it feels like when you're jumping tandem. And when the chute hit, my head went back and hit the guy in the helmet. And we both had helmets on, thank God, but I was like, my God, if we'd done that without helmets on, it would have knocked his ass out. And just so all these little tiny things that come again from having a story behind the story, having actually done it, you notice those little tiny things, the pilot chute and your head snapping back, and just all these little things. So,
yeah, that's absolutely fascinating, and I've certainly never ever had somebody on this channel before who has traveled to other dimensions. So that's very cool.
What am I gonna do? In fact, if I could turn this, I'd show you the portal right outside of my garden. That's it. But yes, that's it.
Yeah. But is there any more, let's say, last or important tips that we need to give around adding realism in fantasy, Joseph, before we sort of round off?
Oh, I appreciate it. There's definitely a balance, and you have to definitely know your readership, I think, before you do it. I write for adults. My books have profanity and graphic violence and sex, and I knew going into this that if I was going to write for adults, that adults were going to probably hold me to a higher standard on those mundane details than say a middle grade reader would do if I was writing, fantasy for kids, 12 years old or something. You can get away with a lot more. You have to know your readership. You also have to know what they're going. So you have to know, but really helps to know what they expect, and you need to really value their feedback. And a lot of the time too, your alpha readers and your beta readers of your manuscript are going to be your best barometer for how closely you've threaded that needle, or hell, the degree to which you've stepped over the line, because we're authors, man. We step over the line. That's what we do. And excuse me, it's your beta readers and your editor. Excuse me. Sorry. It's your beta readers and your editor who are going to be the ones to reel you back in. And I think as an author, it's your job to step over that line and then have people kind of pull you back, and you try to push it as far as you possibly can. At least that's what works for me. I don't know, but you have to know your audience. And I do not suggest, I am absolutely not in any way suggesting that anybody go out and go base jumping or go out and start swinging a sword around in their backyard without having any kind of training or anything. For God's sake, don't do that. Learn how, if you're going to do this, learn how to do this stuff. Take the lessons to learn how to do it, because the actual lessons in learning how to do it, that's where the stories are. That's where you learn the process. It's not so much doing it, not even getting good at it. I'm not very good at a lot of these things that I write about in the book. But I took the time to learn how to do it, learning those baby steps. So learning the processes and then the stories from learning it are the things that I work into the book.
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
Big difference there. Yeah.
All right.
Don't advocate. I do not advocate like just buying a sword and you and your buddy teaching yourselves how to sword fight, and that it as a writing exercise. I just don't. Please don't do that. I want to make sure we're clear on that. So yeah. Otherwise, do it, man. It's fun. My God, it's fun, and learning stuff is fun.
It is indeed, absolutely.
So yeah.
So if people want to find out more about your books, and where can they go?
Sure. You can find me at josephmalik.com, JOSEPHMALIK, josephmalik.com. The books are called Dragon's Trail. You can find it on any retailer. You should be able to just Google it. It should pop right up. And the second book is called The New Magic. And You can read them in any order. I wrote them so that the new magic is a sequel. It starts about a month in our time after Dragon's Trail ends. However, I wrote them in such a way that you can read the new magic and then go back and read Dragon's Trail as an origin story for the protagonist if you want. You can jump right in at any point. And I'm going to try to do that with every book in the series, make them all a unique entry point. So you can read them in whichever order you want.
Yeah,
so,
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and while we were fumbling with all our internet and Google Hangout problems before the actual recording, I did ask Joseph to email me the different links. So I will put it in the description field below. So if you're watching and want to check it out, you'll find direct links down there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I loved it. I'll send you those Pegasus saddle pictures as well. So
yeah. I'll love to see that.
You bet.
All right.
Jesper, this was great. Really appreciate it.
It was great talking to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Awesome.
All right. And for those watching out there, thank you so much for watching today. And we will see you next Monday.
Really fun. All right. Take care.